tariff is a tax imposed by the government on goods and services imported by another country. Tariffs are used as a tool to protect domestic industries by making imported goods more expensive. It is typically levied by the value of the imported item and is paid by the importing business to the government of the home country. Tariffs can also be applied for revenue generation or as part of trade negotiation. In the United States, protectionist policies take several forms. Tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods, quotas, which limit how much of a product can come into the country, and government subsidies, which gives local producers a financial advantage. Protectionism refers to a set of economic policies that limit imports in order to protect domestic industries. A tariff is a tax placed on foreign-made goods. This tax is paid by the importing business to the government of the home country, in this case, the US. Today we're going to be focusing on tariffs, which played a central role in Trump's strategy. First, economic nationalism. Trump wanted to revive American manufacturing and reduce the country's dependence on foreign supply chains. Secondly, trade deficit reduction. The U.S. imports more than it exports, creating a trade deficit. By making imports pricier, the goal was to cut the gap and encourage domestic production instead. Thirdly, job protection and growth. These tariffs were meant to protect American jobs, especially in industries like steel, automotive, and tech, by reducing foreign competition. Fourthly, geopolitical leverage. Tariffs became a bargaining chip, particularly against China. The US used them to push back against issues like intellectual property theft and unfair trade practices. And finally, political strategy. This approach resonated with many working-class voters in swing states, people who felt left behind by globalization and job outsourcing.
Some short/long-term effects of Trump's tariffs include increased costs for consumers and businesses, as higher tariffs raise prices on imported goods, which leads to inflationary pressures. The supply chain is also disrupted, as companies relying on global suppliers face increased costs and logistical challenges. In addition, retaliatory tariffs from other nations imposing counter tariffs on U.S. goods can hurt American farmers and exporters. The stock market becomes very volatile, as investors have to respond to trade war uncertainties, which causes the market to fluctuate. Although it could be argued that it might cause a temporary boost in domestic production, as domestic industries see a short-term gain due to reduced competition. It'll also cause economic slowdown, though, as higher costs and trade uncertainties discourage business investments and reduce economic growth. Reduce global competitiveness. The U.S. relies on important components, struggle to compete internationally. There also will be job losses in certain sectors. While some industries benefit, such as agriculture and retail, others suffer loss due to higher costs and lost export markets. Strained diplomatic relations. Trade disputes and trade wars will weaken U.S. relations with allies and trading partners such as Canada and Mexico. Shifts in global trade alliances. Other nations sought new trade agreements, bypassing the U.S. and reducing its global economic influence by boycotting the trade. In the short term, economic short term, increased costs for business, reliant on imports, short-term growth in protected industries. For political, strained relations with trading partners and retaliation from countries such as China. Social, higher consumer prices and mixed effects on employment. Long-term effects for economical, the supply chain shifts, potential innovation decline, and trade war risks. Political, as tensions rise with allies, it weakens the multilateral trade agreements. For social, long-term, uncertainty for workers, change in global economic influences. Alternative policies could be strengthening workers, retraining programs to invest into reskilling workers for high-tech industries, targeted tariffs and incentives, use selective trade barriers rather than broad tariffs, international cooperation, work with allies to address the trade imbalance instead of unilateral tariffs, investment in domestic innovation, encourage R&D and infrastructure development to enhance competitiveness. Now, most of our points have been in theory, though in practice, it is even more clear that these tariffs are negatively correlated with both prices of goods and the stock market crashing. So, this is an image of the bill for an iPhone 16's components. It shows with the old tariff plan, prices of the phone, the components, increased by 54%, causing a price shift from $549 to $846 to produce. And then this is not considering what Apple will have to do to increase their price in order to hit a profit margin. Currently, Trump has rescinded his official tariff policy, lowering most countries to 10%, although due to tensions and a trade war in China, he has raised their tariffs to 145%. With Trump's current tariff policies, bar China's increase from 70% to a whopping 145%, analysts at Rosenblatt Securities estimate a 43% tariff-driven increase on an iPhone 16 from $799 to $1,142. Furthermore, the stock market has completely plummeted, with the entire market crashing, although it has recovered a bit. The graph speaks for itself, with the tariffs leading to a $6.6 trillion value of the market, which is the worst two-day loss in history. Furthermore, stock prices falling are a premeditator towards a recession, being one of the warning signs in 2007 prior to the 2008 recession. According to Bloomberg, 3 days of market losses, Thursday, Friday, and Monday, have wiped out about $10 trillion in global equity value, which is around 10% of global gross domestic product, or GDP, and more than the GDP of 150 countries.
Reciprocal tariffs are calculated tariff rates to balance the trade deficits between countries and incentivize production domestically. This means that both countries benefit from the agreement. However, Trump is describing it as a trade policy where the U.S. would match the tariffs that other countries impose on American goods. So for instance, if country A imposes a 20% tariff on American cars, the U.S. would respond by imposing a 20% tariff on cars from country A. Currently, America imports more goods than it exports overall, and especially from countries such as China and Vietnam. In order to change, he is trying to balance trade with every country by setting tariffs. There is a specific formula that calculates Trump's counteract tariffs. Divide the trade deficit in goods with a country by their total good exports to America, and then half it to get the tariff. Let's take the European Union for example. America's goods deficit with the EU was $236 billion in 2024. Dividing that number for the EU's goods exports to the US, which was $606 billion, the result was 39%, which you roughly have to get the tariff of 20%. This approach is highly flawed, as the reason the trade deficit between America and everywhere else is so large is due to the fact that America buys way more than its imports. For example, Trump is levying a 37% reciprocal tariff on Botswana, from which America buys 4 times as much good as it sells. America purchases new raw materials like diamonds because it's rare in the US. So if America buys diamonds from Botswana because it has hardly any of its own, is it a good idea to impose a reciprocal tariff? In addition to this, most American companies have their factories offshore in order to deal with lower prices rather than importing goods domestically. This means tariffs end up actually hurting American corporations too. While at first, it looks like it would only affect overseas corporations abroad, in order to compensate for the smaller profit margin, companies end up raising prices, meaning the burden is also placed onto the consumers. When looking at this from a bird's eye view, it is clear that tariffs will also increase global inflation. When looking at this graph, it is immediately clear that there are 2 equilibriums, one before tax and one after. For the sake of clarity, the one before tax will be referred to E, where the supply and demand intersect, and E1 where QT with PC and PP vertically aligned. In the equilibrium E, no tariffs are applied when consumer and producer surplus are maximized without deadweight loss. E1's prominent features are higher prices and lower profits, with the demand curve shifting to PC, which results in higher effective price paid by consumers, and the supply curve lying on PP, where the producers receive a lower profit. QT is also lower than Q, meaning a reduction in trades and thus a reduction in economic activity. This is because the tax makes the product more expensive for buyers and less profitable for sellers. Consumer surplus represents the benefit consumers get when they are willing to pay more than the actual market price. When tariffs are implemented, consumer surplus decreases because the price increases. Similarly, producer surplus presents the benefit producers get when they sell for more than the minimum price they would accept. Again, after tax, this area also shrinks due to the lower price producers receive. The two triangles under the equilibrium labeled societal loss represent the deadweight loss, which is the value of transactions that would have occurred without the tax and thus a loss in total welfare. Although the government does profit fund this, revealed by the blue triangle or tax revenue, the formula being tax revenue equals PC minus PP times QT, this is the amount of money transferred by consumers and producers. Thus, implementing tariffs would create market inefficiency by reducing the total surplus as well as reducing the deadweight loss, leading to a harmful impact on total welfare. This will increase the price of everything America imports, leading to inflation. Additionally, less trade will create a less specialized economy and start to duplicate products that are being made overseas.
As early as 2025, the United States has implemented a range of tariffs by country of origin and product type. The average effective tariff rate has increased approximately 7.9% based on assumptions of 60% tariff on imports from China, 25% imports from Mexico and Canada, and 10% imports from other countries. Historically, U.S. tariffs have never fluctuated. For instance, the mean applied tariff rate rose from 1.59% in 2018 to 13.78% in 2019, declining to 1.52% in 2020. However, recent policy changes have led to a higher average rate. Specific tariffs include 25% duty on all products imported from Canada and Mexico, as announced by President Trump in February 25. Additionally, tariffs on Chinese imports have increased by 20 percentage points, reflecting a more moderate approach compared to earlier proposals of a 60% hike. These tariffs have significant economic implications, including increased costs for importers and potential disruptions in various industries. For example, the automotive sector is concerned about potential new tariffs affecting global supply chains and increasing manufacturing costs.